How's it going, YouTube? We're back! Yo, man, today we got Jimmy, the High Roller, man. Jimmy High Roller just uploaded a new video. You know we have to hop on to it. By the way, my vision's getting way worse, but I'm not going to wear my glasses until I absolutely have to. Anyway, I use data to find the closest player to Stephen Curry in the entire NBA. Now, in my personal opinion, I think Stephen Curry is the most overrated player of all time. You know, Kobe's right behind him, but I think Stephen Curry is the most overrated player of all time. And the reason why is because Curry, like he just like chucks up shots and it is like luckily for he relies on luck basically. He relies on luck. It's no real skill. Think about it. What other thing does he do besides shoot threes? Absolutely nothing. He can't handle the ball. He can't defend. He can't lay the ball up. He can't even do mid-range shots. He can't play make. He can't rebound. He can't block. He can't steal. He can't do nothing. He has good stamina and he gets lucky. You know what I'm saying? So, in my opinion, I think the closest player to Stephen Curry in the entire NBA is Cameron Payne. So yeah, let's get it started.
Quick, off the top of your head, of all the active players currently in the NBA, who reminds you most of Steph Curry? I'm sure some of the names that come to mind are Trey Young, Tyrese Halliburton, Kyrie Irving.
Hey, you know what I'm saying? Both of these players are are extremely overrated. Trey Young and Tyrese Halliburton, and it's funny that enough that Jimmy Howard said that back to back. Both of those players like extremely overrated. Tyrese Halliburton and Trey Young, extremely overrated. Both are like inefficient shot chuckers, just like Steph Curry. You know, struggles playmaking. You know what I'm saying? Soft players, very soft players. Short. You know what I'm saying? So yeah, Russell Westbrook dropping all of them off.
Kevin Durant, if he was 9 inches shorter. Try all you want, but the overwhelming and correct answer is no one. Even as the catalyst to one of the biggest evolutions in basketball. This is like the
first time Jimmy Who Island. Whoa. This is the first time Jimmy High Roller is really gonna glaze in this video because the fact that he just said nobody like is compared to Steph Curry, which is completely false. Even though there's a bunch of inefficient shot chuckers that get lucky in the NBA, just like Steph Curry, but Steph Curry's like the most glazed one. Why? Because his face looks nice, I guess. I mean, all of y'all are gay anyway. So, like, Curry glaze is like, there's no reason to glaze Curry besides you think you find him attractive. Like, all Curry glazes are gay. I mean, Steph Curry has no skill. He gets lucky. You must be gay. I mean,
even as the
I'm sorry to come here and tell you
the truth, y'all just in basketball history, there is still nobody that is quite like Steph in the NBA today, or ever, for that matter. The greatest shooter of all time by a country mile, as devastating off the ball as he is with it. The skills to carve up defenses and score from anywhere, despite being a relatively undersized,
they shows one of Steph Curry's
by
only
now,
layup
nearly
attempts.
a decade after the long ball
They
took
can't
over
even
the
find
NBA,
Curry
it
highlights,
was
so they have
assumed
to
that
put random
Steph's
player
influence
highlights,
would
bro.
spawn
It's
an
crazy.
entire generation of copycats. And although the game has changed, there's still no one that plays it the way he does. While aimlessly browsing through some stats not too long ago, it came to my attention that a 37-year-old Steph Curry once again led the NBA in three-point shooting last season for the 10th time in his career. The league is still trying to catch up to where Steph has been for the last 10 years. And with each passing season, the reality becoming more painfully obvious that Steph isn't a product of the league's evolution. The league's evolution is a product of him. And as long as Steph can do things that no one else can do, it may be a while before we find a worthy successor.
And this is actually like the
But why is that?
I've ever seen.
In fact, with a game that has become the blueprint for modern day guards, why has there not been a single player in the NBA who plays like him or can do the things he can do? This series of questions led me down a long and exhausting rabbit hole of what I believe to be the most extensive look into this topic. Who is the most similar player in the NBA today to Steph Curry?
Alright.
That time with get from Fresh App now. Currently received 200 YouTube. How can you accurately compare anyone to one of the most unique players in basketball?
Curry puts up a three.
And he's celebrating like he
task
actually
of
did.
finding the most similar player to Steph
I don't know
Curry,
how you
the
get 4
first
rings off
instinct
of
would
luck.
be maybe
Like,
a
how does that
long-range
happen?
sharpshooter. But these
I know
comps
why.
never quite
He got
work.
carried.
The
Jordan
best
Poole,
three-point shooters in recent history are
Draymond, even
far
though they
too
lost that
one-dimensional
game,
in
KD
offense to be
carried
compared to
Iguodala.
Steph. Look for perimeter players that can generate offense like Steph, and you'll
Got
find a
carried.
lot of freak athletes, ISO-heavy guards, and players who aren't willing to run to hell and back like he does every other possession to get a bucket. This 2020 Bleacher Report article cited Mark Price, Pete Maravich, Steve Nash, and Jerry West as the most comparable players to Steph. All of them solid comps if they hadn't retired decades ago. CraftedNBA.com has a great tool called Doppelgangers, which uses an extensive batch of metrics to find similar players throughout the NBA. But this tool specifically looks at the results of a player's game without including the method in which they got those results, which is an important distinction. For example, Steph and LeBron both averaged the same amount of points last season, but the way they scored those points were wildly different. In our experiment, the method is just as important as the results. And so I decided to take matters into my own hands. And after countless hours of research, metric-based analysis, and data crunching in an attempt to answer this question, I think I've got it. An almost definitive conclusion on the most similar player to Steph Curry in the NBA today. And the answer may surprise you. First, I had to reduce the entire league down to players who had even an ounce of resemblance to Steph and his game. Floor generals, undersized guards, sharpshooters, off-ball merchants, great scorers, crafty perimeter players, players who love the three ball, and because, why not, his own brother. Eventually, I was able to narrow the list of players
Steph Curry
included in
has
this
more
experiment
skill
to
than
about
Steph.
75.
I'm just
Of
gonna
those
say.
75 players, here are the ones that eventually scored the highest in similarity to Steph. Now, how exactly did I quantify similarity throughout this process? Well, first I had to determine the metrics in which I wanted to measure. And here are those metrics: gravity, usage and creation, shot selection, portability, passing, defense, athleticism, dominance, shooting ability, and play style. 10.
How much attention and resources a team uses. Shot selection, the type of shots players take, so lucky shots. Bro, Steph Curry's not dominant. Steph Curry's not even a dominant. All right.
Isolated metrics that factor in each and
Bro,
every
he's not
aspect
even a
of Steph's
defensive
game.
player.
Finding the similarities between him and any other player was the easy part. For example, take passing, which can be measured fairly accurately with passer rating, a metric that measures how frequent, effective, and efficient a player passes the ball. Steph's career passer rating is 6.9. That's pretty good. Jalen Brunson has a passer rating of 7.13. That's even better. Klay Thompson has a passer rating of 3.48. And that's not so good. To quantify just how similar these two players are to
Jalen Brunson is better than Steph Curry?
Steph in terms of passing, we just need to figure out how much their passer rating deviates from Steph's. In this case, Jalen Brunson's passer rating only deviates by 3.2%, while Klay Thompson's passer rating deviates by 49.5%. This would give Brunson a passing similarity score of 96.8% and Klay Thompson a similarity score of 50.5%. By using this method of measurement, I calculated the similarity score of every player in our experiment across all 10 previously mentioned categories, then I tallied up their score to find the most similar player to Steph. The player with the highest score after evaluating all 10 categories is of course the player who shares the most in common with him. So now you know the method, let's see the results. Now the first factor we're going to be taking a look at is Steph's most valuable skill, his shooting ability. In a game where deciding who is the best at anything can be a tall task, Steph has completely removed any room for debate as the greatest shooter of all time. A skill set
Look
so
at that,
valuable.
bro, no. Bro, I'm not even gonna get mad today, bro.
Any room for
I
debate
can't watch
as
these
the
Curry
greatest
highlights
shooter
because
of
of
all
how
time.
much.
A
Bro,
skill
what that? There's no regular shot. Nobody regularly shoots like that, bro. It's not like this was even. This is a normal shot for Steph Curry. Look at how high the ball is, bro. If this isn't luck, then I don't know what is,
valuable
bro.
that he altered the course of basketball with it, and a skill that we can measure using crafted NBA's shooting quality metric. It's a stat that combines shooting percentages with spacing and shot value to find what they describe to be the most accurate shooters in the league on a scale from 1 to 100. For some perspective, no player in NBA history has ever scored a perfect 100 out of 100 in shooting quality for an entire season, except for Steph, who's done it 4 times. But throughout his career, Steph has maintained an average shooting quality of 94.6. And the most similar player to him in the NBA today in terms of shooting ability is none other than his former Splash Bro, Klay Thompson, who has a career average shooting quality of 85.7 and a similarity score of 90.6%, followed closely by Desmond Bane, Peyton Pritchard, Buddy Hield, and Seth Curry. Keep in mind, although I will only be displaying the results of 20 to 30 players per category, each individual score is being factored in and will be revealed at the end. But just as important as Steph's ability to shoot the ball is where he's shooting the ball. 10 years ago, there were 3 players in the entire league who averaged at least 20 points per game with a 3-point attempt rate of at least 40%. Volume scores off of volume threes, a shot diet that was essentially prohibited unless you were an absolute flamethrower. But thanks to Steph, times have changed. Because last season, there were 24 players around the league who averaged at least 20 a game while attempting at least 40% of all of their shots from beyond the arc. Steph laying out the roadmap for modern day shooters, with about 15% of his shots consisting of layups, 21% of his shots in the mid-range, and over half of all of his shots throughout his career being 3-pointers. And the most similar player to Steph in the NBA today in terms of shot selection is Tyrese Halliburton, with shooting tendencies that virtually mirror Steph's and a similarity score of 94%, followed by Anthony Simons, Jordan Poole, and Patty Mills. One thing I want to point out here is just how many young players compare well to Steph in this category. Guys who watch Steph at a young age and have skill sets that were more than likely influenced by Steph. Which brings up the next category, and one of the most indicative measures of similarity from player to player. And that is play style. What role they play on offense, where they find the most value while they're on the court, and their habits both on and off the ball. Now, quantifying a player's play style is tough to do. What do you measure? And how do you measure? Well, on craftednba.com, within each player's profile, there is a breakdown of their usage by play type. These plays range from ISO possessions, pick and roll as the ball handler and the roll man, the post, off-ball cuts, handoffs, screens, and spot up. These 8 play types are essentially the 8 major different roles a player can play on any given possession, and we can use them to get some insight into the habits, strengths, and weaknesses of each individual player. In the case of Steph, the 4 most revealing characteristics of his offensive game are ISO possessions, spot-up shooting, possessions coming off of screens, and pick and rolls as the ball handler. Now, if we take these 4 play types and search for the player with the most similar usage across all 4, then the player that has the most similar play style to Steph is Devin Booker, who has eerily similar usage to Steph across these 4 play types and easily the highest similarity score in this category of 84.8%, despite not necessarily being a player you would associate with playing like Steph. The next most similar players are Emmanuel Quickley, CJ McCollum, Jordan Clarkson, and Cam Thomas. For the most part, quick movement shooters who play below the rim and operate best in set actions as opposed to isolation. Play styles that are necessary thanks to our next category, athleticism. Unlike many of the top guards from his era, Derrick Rose, Russell Westbrook, John Wall, Steph's lack of world-class explosiveness has kept his game for the most part on the ground and away from the basket. According to B-Spark, a metric that uses results from athletic tests such as the ones included in the NBA Combine to determine a player's speed, power, agility, reaction, and quickness, Steph ranks in the 28th percentile in terms of athleticism in the NBA, or at least he was at the time he was drafted. And in terms of athleticism, the most similar players to Steph in the NBA today are D'Angelo Russell and Jordan Poole, with nearly identical B-Spark ratings to Steph's and similarity scores of 99.9%, followed by Peyton Pritchard, Luka Doncic, and Cade Cunningham. Now, our next category has been one of the more underrated aspects of Steph's game throughout his career, and that is his defense. Where his athleticism and size fall short, Steph makes up for it on the defensive end with elite IQ, quick hands, and adding over 20 pounds to his frame throughout his career. In fact, according to Crafted Defensive Plus Minus, an all-in-one advanced metric that measures how valuable a player is on defense, Steph is actually a net positive on the defensive end. Now, where Steph does struggle a bit is his defensive versatility. A target for switches and mismatches against larger guards and combo players, especially as the league continues to get bigger around the perimeter. Take these two metrics, crafted defensive plus minus and defensive versatility, and we can find out how valuable Steph is on defense and which player is most similar to him in this aspect, which in this case is Donovan Mitchell, with a similarity score of 96% on defense, followed by Kyrie Irving, Austin Reeves, and DeJounte Murray. But whatever Steph doesn't do on the defensive end, he makes up for tenfold as arguably the most valuable offensive player in the history of the league. With his usage and creation, Steph has spent his career as one of the largest offensive generators in the league, both carrying offenses and playing within the offense. And to measure this, we can use 3 different metrics: box creation estimate, offensive load, and usage percentage, where the player most similar to Steph will undoubtedly have to be an ultra-offensive engine who can create opportunities not just for himself, but for his team. So it should be no surprise that when it comes to usage and creation, it is James Harden who is most similar to Steph in the NBA today, with a similarity score of 98.9% and career metrics that are virtually identical to Steph's across the board. The next most similar players are Damian Lillard, LaMelo Ball, Ja Morant, and Cade Cunningham. Pair Steph's ability to create offense with his shooting, and you have a recipe for his game-breaking quality as a player. His gravity. It doesn't matter where he is or what he's doing. When Steph is on the court, he is a threat from anywhere at any time, disrupting defenses with and without the ball and forcing them to get sucked into his every movement. Hence the term gravity. Or as B-Ball Index describes it, how much attention and resources a team uses trying to defend a player while on and off the ball. You can see it in action every time you watch him play, as defensive schemes completely fall apart trying to track him around the court, send double teams when he's 30 feet out, and at times completely neglect other players altogether when the Warriors are running options for Steph. It's easy to see, but tough to measure. However, B-Ball Index makes an attempt at quantifying a player's gravity by using a few different metrics like double team rate, shot location, team shot quality, and tracking data with their on-ball and off-ball gravity metrics. Stats that are rated according to percentile relative to the rest of the league, and where Steph has career averages in the 95th percentile in on-ball gravity and nearly the 100th percentile in off-ball gravity, making him not only one of the most lethal on-ball offensive threats in the league, but by far the most valuable off-ball threat in the league throughout his career. And among the players we are evaluating, the one with the most similar gravity to Steph is Damian Lillard, with a similarity score of 95.8%, followed by Kevin Durant, Tyler Hero, Cade Cunningham, and Devin Booker. But gravity holds a lot less weight if you want a great passer. As the defense collapses, how well can you find opportunities that open up? And despite not playing the traditional point guard role throughout his career, Steph is an excellent passer, particularly in transition, in the pick and roll, and out of double teams. Of course, a good metric to evaluate passing skill is passer rating. This metric, similar to a few others, is on a scale of 1 to 10, with 10 being the best possible rating. Now, throughout his career, Steph has had a passer rating of 6.9, and the player most similar to him in this metric is Dennis Schroeder, who has a career passer rating of 6.93 and a similarity score of 99.5%. The next most similar players are DeJounte Murray, Alex Caruso, Brandon Podziemski, and Damian Lillard. In this category, it's not the floor generals, but rather combo guards who are the most similar to Curry. Add all of these traits up, and you'll find why Steph is not just one of the most lethal offensive weapons of all time, but also one of the most portable. Steph has the skill set to thrive in any system around any players. It's one of the reasons why the Warriors have continued to find success throughout his career, despite featuring an array of different players over time. Steph's value is virtually independent of his situation, and there's actually a metric that makes an attempt to measure this adaptability called portability. This metric collects data like passer rating, shooting ability, ball dominance, and usage, as well as defensive versatility, and calculates how portable a player is within any given system. In other words, how well would a player fit if you dropped him into a team with 14 random players? This metric also being on a scale from 1 to 10.
He fit pretty well because all you gotta do is just throw up something.
9.18,
hope
one
it
of the
goes
highest in NBA history, and the most similar player to Steph in this regard is Mike
Nothing
Conley,
changed.
who has the same exact
would you look
career
at that?
portability rating as
A
Steph
bump.
with 9.18, 100% similarity, followed by Desmond Bain, Tyrese Halliburton,
And Mike Conley,
Jalen Williams, which brings
is
up
better
our
than
last
Steph Curry
and most polarizing category
of all time, so.
dominance. How good at basketball Steph is. A player can
he's
shoot
not
like
that
Steph,
good.
move the ball like Steph, play the same position as him,
Bro,
but if they aren't
if y'all
dominating
really think
games
Steph
like
Curry
him,
is
how
dominant,
similar
bro,
to
y'all
Steph
might be
Curry can they
brainwashed.
possibly be? And to measure dominance, instead of looking at accolades or accomplishments, we are going to look at purely how great they have been in their time in the NBA through the lens of an advanced metric, crafted plus minus. Now, this metric is an aggregate
Plus
of
minus
10
is
other
a fake
advanced
stat.
metrics. It's essentially an
Nobody really
all-in-one
cares
of
about
all
it like
the
that.
all-in-ones. It's
Same
just what
thing
we're
with
looking
true
for.
shooting.
And
True
Steph's
shooting.
career crafted plus
True
minus
shooting
is
don't make sense.
6.45,
Like, just stick to regular
the
field goal
8th
shooting.
highest in NBA
And same with
history.
usage
The
rate, that's a
closest
fake
player
stat.
to Steph within our player pool in terms of dominance
And I don't
is
think
Chris
turnovers,
Paul,
like,
with
matter
a career
that much, honestly.
crafted plus minus of
Only, like, when it's down to the
6.59
wire.
and a similarity score of 98%, followed by James
Oh, wow, would you
Harden,
look at
Kevin
Chris Paul,
Durant,
another
and
bum.
Luka Doncic. And with that, we have now assessed all 55 players across all 10
So basically,
categories.
his closest
A process
comparison
of
is
research
Cameron
and
Payne.
number crunching that took me far longer than I'm willing to admit. But it was all worth it. Because in a league where Steph remains a unicorn, I think with very high accuracy, I have narrowed the search for the most Steph-like player down to one. After scanning a field of 75 potential matches across 10 different categories and dozens of metrics, the most similar player to Steph Curry in the NBA today is Damian Lillard, which...
No, bro. Damian Lillard is way better than Stephen Curry. You can't compare Damian Lillard. You gotta compare Curry to Damian Lillard, not Lillard to Curry. And Steph Curry doesn't compare to Dame. We all know the truth. The real comparison is Cameron Payne. But Jimmy High Roller over here for the first time in his career is glazing Stephen Curry. Steph Curry is not better than Damian Lillard, let alone.
As a Blazers fan that watched this man
Let
for over
alone
a
Killian
decade,
Hayes,
completely
bro.
adds up. In the end, Dame finished with an average similarity score of 82.71% across all
Like,
10
you're a
categories,
Blazers fan, you should
finishing
know
just
Dame's
ahead
better
of
than
James
Curry.
Harden, Kyrie Irving, and Kevin Durant. All names that make sense, but for completely different reasons. Although there is truly no one like Steph in the NBA, both past and present, Damian Lillard is about as close as you're gonna get on the stat sheet,
Bro,
the eye
no,
test,
bro.
and in skill set. And if we look at the results from this experiment, you can really get a full scope of all of these similarities, especially in gravity, passing, usage and creation, and shooting ability. The only categories he didn't score well in were dominance and playstyle, which makes sense. As great as Dame is, the peaks of Steph's career have been about as high as any player in NBA history. Steph has a sizable gap on everyone in the player pool in this department outside of Chris Paul, Harden, Durant, and Luka. And in terms of playstyle, Dame works in isolation much more than Steph does. Some of
This
this
is
can
proof
be
that
attributed
stats
to
ain't
Dame's
everything,
superior athleticism. You'll never see Steph competing in a dunk contest, but as his career has progressed
Exactly.
and his explosiveness has declined, their games have become more similar with time. Lillard now less reliant on his athleticism as his skill set has gotten deeper and his range much further. Dame also prefers to initiate offense through pick and rolls as opposed to Steph, who will initiate the offense but works more off the ball during these actions to
Look
get
at that.
open
He's
for a shot
spreading his
later in
legs after he
possessions.
shoots. That's not a
Tendencies that
real
bring out
jump
the biggest
shot.
differences visibly
That's not a
when you
real
watch them
jump
play.
shot,
But
bro.
outside of these few differences, their games are strikingly similar in comparison to other players around the league. When I saw the results of this experiment, I couldn't help but to think of one moment during the 2021 All-Star Game, when Steph and Dame were going back and forth trading shots from half court. If there is one man who can go blow for blow with the greatest shooter of all time from 40 feet out, it's Damian Lillard. A player who's hit
You mean
so
who could
many
go
clutch
go for
bombs,
go
he has a
to see
celebration
who
for
has
it.
more
And
luck?
although one of Steph's superpowers is his off-ball brilliance, a clearer look into their similarities comes in moments when Steph really leans into his abilities to take players off the
He
dribble
lost the
and
ball
create his
there,
own
bro.
shots. The key to their similarities being that they are both two of the greatest shooters of all time, but they aren't just shooters. They're offensive machines, where most players who are capable of shooting at an ultra-elite level tend to neglect alternative scoring opportunities. Steph and Dame, although both being relatively undersized, are incredible at getting inside, collapsing defenses, and scoring around the rim, as well as creating open looks for their teammates. Very rarely do you get a player who is just as efficient and willing to score from inside 6 feet as he is from 26 feet. And almost never do you see a player that can do both at historic levels. I do think over the years, Steph has essentially market-corrected Lillard. Everything Dame can do, outside of maybe ISO, Steph can do better. For years, I watched defenses break their brains trying to figure out how to stop a guy with a hair trigger and 35 feet of range. And I couldn't help but to notice there's only one other guy in the league that was capable of the same thing. Now, here are the full results from this experiment, with the 75 total players involved condensed to the 55 with the highest scores. And there's a few interesting things going on here. First, the top 3 finishers are all guards from the same era as Steph: Lillard, Harden, and Kyrie. All products of their era, playing a similar brand of basketball throughout their careers, even over younger players who shaped their game around Steph's. Kevin Durant, a 7-foot small forward, finished in 4th. The only 7-footer in the history of basketball that you could legitimately compare
like
to
this
Steph
stat
Curry.
is basically
But some
saying Steph Curry's
surprising
better
names
than
that
all of
finished
these
high
dudes,
were
which he's
Fred
not.
VanVleet, Emmanuel Quickley, and Desmond Bane, who all finished in the top 10 while sharing different things in common with Steph. I also want to point out that Seth Curry, the man's own brother, finished in 42nd. Among the younger guys in the league, it was Tyrese Halliburton who had the most in common with Steph, finishing in 5th, followed by LaMelo Ball, Cade Cunningham, and Anthony Edwards. For the most part, it is the highly skilled and versatile perimeter players that have the most in common with Steph, even if aesthetically they don't necessarily look similar on the court. Players who are great shooters, create a lot of offense, have high gravity both on and off the ball, are about average defensively, and aren't freak athletes. Regardless of the way it looks, there are many parallels in the games of the most elite guards around the league, and Kevin Durant. And it's their abilities that lead them to a style of play that is similar to Steph's in one way or another. So, there you have it. In case you were wondering who exactly is the most similar player to Steph.
All right, man. This is proof that you can't rely on stats all the time, because clearly we all know the truth. You know what I'm saying? It's Cameron Payne, but I mean that's just what it is, bro. If Steph Curry fans, those 11-year-olds, can't handle the truth, then I mean, shoot. I mean that's just them. They're 11 years old. They'll learn soon enough. But Steph Curry's not. He's not really like that. He gets paid for having a cute face and getting lucky. Like, bro, it's crazy.